All right, so we're gonna go ahead and try this out. I'm going to record lectures in order for you guys to not just have to like read and try and teach yourself. I'm going to attempt to lecture you. The only problem that I have is right now, you guys can't ask questions while I'm doing this, which means I can't get off task. Maybe we'll finish on time. Who knows? All right, so our first presentation, this is in key question 1. And it's basically what caused the Great Depression. So a lot of this has to do with the economic situation of the 1920s. In the 1920s, we saw rampant spending, buying on the margin. The stock prices were increasing of a lot of major corporations, and people were essentially just trying to spend because they wanted all these new things. And then in 1929, that all came crashing down, and we entered a period of 10 years of the worst economic depression that we've ever faced. So we have a few essential questions. What caused the stock market crash of 1929? So what's the reason? Okay, what precipitated this crash? And then also, what were the consequences of the stock market crash? A lot of people, and I want to stop real quick, a lot of people assume that the stock market crash was the cause of the Great Depression. And it's really not, okay? So this is not the cause of the Great Depression, okay? There were a lot of other causes. This was what we would call a symptom. All right. So, causes of the stock market crash and consequences of the stock market crash. That's what we need to answer in this key question. So, this is just a review of theme 4 of the 1920s. So, what were some of the economic boom situations that were happening? All right. As we know, we had new construction jobs, new technologies. We had a high demand for all new different products. So when we're talking about new products here, what we're talking about is, let's see, electricity, dishwashers, vacuum, let's see, what else? Cars, can't forget cars, okay, radio, all kind of new technology. This is fueled by the Second Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution, please remember, is during that time of the Gilded Age. So what time period we're talking about here is the late 1800s after the Civil War. So we're talking like let's call it 1890 to 1917, okay? The Second Industrial Revolution ends, I call 1917, because of World War I. Okay, we stop producing for ourselves and we start producing for the war effort. Okay, but the new products and technology are still there. And in the 1920s, once people are coming back from the war, they want to buy these things. Okay, so when we're coming back from the war, like, it's kind of the idea of we've sacrificed for so many years and now we would like to not sacrifice. So we're buying all kinds of things, okay? Henry Ford, you can see here, this is the actual assembly line here, okay? All right, and so what you're seeing is these individuals here, they are working on one specific job. This guy has one job. This guy has one job. This guy has one job. And that's all they do every single day. They do this one specific job. And that actually makes a more efficient production system. Henry Ford is able to produce significantly more cars than he has ever been before. And so he's actually been able to make cheaper cars. I think at one time the Model T Ford was, I want to say $300. I could be wrong. I could be making that up. Now, you're going to ask me the question, hey, Miss A, how much was $300 in 1919 or 1921. And I'm going to check. So according to our handy dandy inflation calendar, $300 in 1925 would have been the equivalent to $4,434.48 in today's money. Not much, actually, now that I think about it, but still a significant amount, okay? So here's the really big problem when it comes to this economic boom, all right? People are paying for everything using credit. This means credit cards, okay? So, let me just erase some of this here. Credit cards aren't always a bad thing. They allow you to be able to buy necessities whenever you need them, as long as you pay them off. The problem is, what credit cards do, or what buying on credit does, says, hey, this thing costs $300, okay? I have $50. So I'm going to pay you $50, and then I'm going to make installment payments of $20 every month, okay? The problem is you don't necessarily make a lot of money. So you're paying, this $20 a month, and that's coming out of what you should be paying for, like your mortgage payment or your groceries. You're also buying all of these things on credit. So everything is being purchased on credit. And before you know it, you have a really nice house. You look very wealthy, but you're incredibly in debt. In the 1920s, we also see some farming bankruptcies happen. The farming industry suffers significantly in the 1920s, and this becomes a serious issue in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Income inequality, what that simply means is we see the rich getting very rich and the poor getting very poor. And this has a lot to do with the fact that we have laissez-faire capitalism. Remember that laissez-faire means lazy or hands off. Okay? Next slide. Okay. So some backstory here to the politics. In 1920, President Harding is elected. Harding's whole idea is he wants to return to this idea of normalcy. We are still at I guess we're just at the very end of World War I when he gets elected. And he doesn't want his presidency to be marred by the idea of a wartime presidency. He doesn't want to have all of these issues that come with being at war. He doesn't want to have to deal with sacrifice. He doesn't want to have to deal with losing men left, right, and center. So he wants to return to normalcy. And this is the idea, right? We're getting back into the idea of isolationism, okay? So we basically demilitarize, all right? Even though we have an incredibly strong military at this point in time, we don't get rid of it, but we slowly start to lessen where we're at. We completely go to a isolationist policy once again after World War I. And we also kind of start forgetting these reforms. If you remember, we have three massive reform era presidents. Not FDR. Teddy Roosevelt. Let's see. William Howard Taft. And Woodrow Wilson. These are our progressive era reformers from 1901 to 1919. And these guys, they're great, right? We start busting trust. We are conservationists. We start putting into place things like the FDA and the Meat Inspection Act, and we really do try and improve the lives for everyday Americans. Harding doesn't care. Harding says, listen, that was all fine and dandy then, but now we want to go back to what it was like before this. It is not fantastic. And he has this very conservative economic policy. And that economic Okay, and that economic policy does get carried out by Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover, these two guys right here. Calvin Coolidge was a one-term president who basically did nothing, really not a president of note. And Herbert Hoover, of course, was the president during the initial crash of the stock market in 1929. All right, so the whole idea of a conservative economic policy is actually very similar to what a conservative economic policy is today. They believe that the role of the government is entirely to make business more profitable. They believe that the government role in business should be very limited, meaning that the government should stay out of business and allow big business, like for example, Amazon, to function entirely on their own without a whole lot of interference. This, of course, is the idea of laissez-faire. Okay, you're going to hear that a lot, and I want you to be very comfortable with the term. Okay, they also, and this is a really ironic part given the current political climate and the fact that this is about 100 years ago. They entirely believe that it should be businessmen who are running the government, meaning we should elect businessmen to be president, we should elect businessmen to be senators and representatives. It should be people who can run the country like a business, because that is a management experience. My main issue with this is not that management experience is bad. I don't actually think that big business is bad. I don't even think that we should not elect businessmen to the government. I have no problem with that. My main issue with this is that the country cannot be run like a business. And so when you elect somebody who is business minded, they have to be able to remove themselves from that mindset. And that's very rare to happen. Of course, and this should be relatively, these few things here should be relatively similar to what you're used to hearing in the news. The big business favors fewer taxes, okay? Less taxes on them, less taxes on everyone, less taxes for corporations specifically. Because the whole idea here is what we would call trickle-down economics. And that is a term that actually gets really popularized in the 1980s by Ronald Reagan. But trickle-down economics is the idea that when big business can save, they will pass along those savings to their employees, or they'll reinvest it into the economy. I really encourage you to look up whether or not trickle-down economics is a functional economic idea. Fun fact, it's not. It doesn't actually work, because what tends to happen is the big business actually does not reinvest. They just kind of keep everything. So in 1922, so this is towards the middle of Harding's presidency, this tariff gets passed, the Fordney-McCumber tariff right here. All right. And basically it's a massive tariff. Okay. So what a tariff does, remember, is it imposes a tax on goods imported from a foreign country. It would not have been a bad idea for us to continuously purchase goods from Europe. They were seriously recovering from World War I. They needed the cash flux. We could have actually seriously helped them out if we just continued to purchase goods at a cheaper price. A small tariff wouldn't have been a bad idea, but a massive tariff was actually really bad. Well, it was bad for them specifically. So we tariffed anywhere between 27%, that's the Underwood tariff, to about 38.5%. And that just is an astronomical amount. And we can't afford to pay those tariffs. They can't afford to import on that good either. And going back to our final aspect of conservative economic philosophy is the whole idea that that there should be no regulation. Harding kind of did what we've seen recent presidents do, which is appoint people who don't actually like the organization that they are running, or they don't believe in the organization that they are running. For example, Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education appointed by our current president, and she doesn't believe in public education. Like at all. And so likewise, Warren Harding appointed people to regulate big business and such, and who didn't believe in regulation. So they probably didn't do as good of a job as they could have. He also, so the Interstate Commerce Commission, we've talked about this before. The ICC was created as a way to regulate the trade and regulate the railroad industry specifically because it had caused the Panic of 1873. Harding appointed a bunch of people to the ICC that were actually very favorable to the railroads, and so they did not regulate at all whatsoever. So that became a really ineffectual, agency. Okay, so I want to go back real quick. No, I don't. Never mind. All right. So some other issues. We have unequal income distribution. This is the rich get richer. The poor get poorer. It's bad, okay? So we see the wealthiest 1% of the population are owning 60% of the national wealth, okay? And this is the entire decade of the 1920s. In 1929, we have 70% of families below the good standard of living. This could also be determined as the poverty level. Okay? Many workers, they're earning less than they did before World War I. And also, this is what I've already mentioned before, they're buying goods on credit, meaning they're not able to actually afford the goods that they're buying. And then by the time the 1920s comes to an end, just before the crash happens, they don't have a whole lot of credit left. That means like they've maxed out their credit cards, or they don't really have credit cards back then, but they've maxed out their equity loans. They don't have any more credit to continue buying, which means that we're not consuming as much, which means that the economy kind of ends in a standstill. Okay. So, what's going on with the farms? Well, we have bankruptcies of the farms in the 1920s. In 1920, specifically, we have 1,000 farm bankruptcies and then 5,500 by 1928. Okay, overproduction of farming is happening as well. Okay? What this is meaning is that I don't know how to explain. Okay, so, Okay, so farming overproduction has a lot to do with with the method of farming that many were using. So let's say I have a farm. Okay, now what normally happens is I have different crops. Crop 1, crop 2, crop 3, and then I don't put anything here, okay? And the reason why I don't do this is because I want to rest the soil. In the next growing cycle, what I'll do is I will rotate. So 1 becomes 2, or 2 becomes 1. It goes like this, okay? They were not doing that back then. They were simply just overproducing, okay? So if this is my land, everything is crop 1, okay? Or everything is crop 2. When you overproduce something, so the laws of supply and demand are that as the supply goes up, what tends to happen is the prices tend to go down. And that's mainly because the demand doesn't ever meet the supply, right? So this never happens. So what farmers are doing is they are flooding the market with whatever products that they're creating or farming. So corn, wheat, potatoes, other Midwestern vegetables that I can't think of right now because I've only had half a cup of coffee and I'm very tired. So the overproduction leads to lower prices. Lower prices leads to less profit, basically. All right, because let's see. So normally I sell my good for $5 a pound. All right. That's my normal. But now I have so much in the market, and I'm not producing, or I'm not able to push it. So I lower it to $3 a pound. On this $5 per pound, let's say I'm making, so this is my profit. Let's say I'm making $3 per pound in profit. Well, now I'm not making, or I'm only making $1 per pound. That's a significant decrease in profit. This decrease in profit here means that the farmers are not able to pocket as much money. This leads to them going into debt and eventually bankrupting their farm. Okay, this is an incredibly important topic right here, these two. Okay, and these go hand in hand. So, appearance of prosperity is the idea that we look like we're doing okay. This is the idea of the Gilded Age. It looks like it's doing okay, all right? But because we're making these really risky economic choices, we're buying on the margin, we are overextending our credit. By the end of the 1920s, we were basically bound to crash. It was inevitable. Okay, so this is the risky economic behavior I was just talking about. All right, banks are participating in the stock market, and then we're buying on the margin, which is basically, so we're borrowing money from a broker in order to purchase stock. So when you purchase stock, what happens is, so like Amazon stock right now is like $1,000, okay? So AMZN, one share is like $1,100, okay? If I want to buy a share in Amazon stock, I have to have this in cash. I give that to a stockbroker and they purchase a share for me. Okay. What's happening here is buying on the margin is saying, oh, I want this, but I don't have this, so I'm going to borrow it. Here is the big problem when you're buying on the margin, when you're borrowing money. Okay. What eventually happens is if the stock market goes up, that's fine because you bought it here and you get to profit all this. If it goes down, like stocks do, okay, and if it goes down past this point here, because this is where you bought it at, now you owe more than what the stock is worth. And you're going to go bankrupt. So eventually that's exactly what happens. The stock market crashes in 1929. So right here, this is our roaring 20s. You look, it looks so good. Economic growth, it's fantastic. It's the best. It's the best. No better. Okay? And then this is Black Tuesday right here. Black Tuesday, if you see at the very top, okay, we're hitting, it's the highest it had ever been at this point. And Black Tuesday, okay, this is in October, so this is October. October 1929. We have a Black Tuesday, then we have a Black Thursday. We bottom out, and this is what happens. Okay? We drop almost 100 points. It's a massive, massive economic loss, and that's in one day. This is one day. I just would like you guys to remember that. And this is essentially what happens over the next, let's call it, I don't know, 3-4 years. Okay? It's not good. We are actually not the only country who experienced a Great Depression. So everybody is going through this. This does not perfectly tell you what's happening. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I do not know where I left off because I decided to take a break from this. That break lasted for 3 hours. So I have no idea. We're gonna edit all of this out. Maybe. Probably not. So the Great Depression was a global event. The country that actually got hurt the worst at this point in time was Germany. And that's largely due to the fact that they were paying millions of dollars in reparations to France, the UK, and us due to the Treaty of Versailles. Fun fact, that is also why they ended up starting World War II. That and Hitler's general disdain for the Jews. Okay,
So what you're seeing on this graph here is a basic graph of income per capita, meaning per person. So at the beginning of, or I guess at the end of the 1920s, in 1929, okay, what we're seeing here is that we're pretty high up there. We've got about approximately personal income. We got about $85 billion in personal income. By 1932, so we're talking 3 years. By 1932, that personal income has dropped to $50 billion, a significant decrease. We do start to see that after FDR initiated the first 100 days, meaning the first New Deal, we do start to see a general increase. This right here is called the FDR recession. And then what you're seeing here is an increase slowly. This massive jump is caused by World War II. All right, so what was the Great Depression officially? The Great Depression was the stock market crash in 1929. So this was October 1929. We refer to it as Black Tuesday and Black Thursday. Okay. After that, what happened was that the economic crash essentially. All right. So the economic crash essentially bankrupted everything because of the loss in stock market value. Many businesses had to close. All of their money, all of their capital was rolled up into that. And with that happening, it became a very cyclical effect. So when companies closed or banks closed, people got laid off. They lost their jobs. When people got laid off, they lost income, which means they became poor. And then from there, they couldn't buy anything. And so now we have no more spending happening in the economy, which essentially forces other businesses to close. And then you end up having a cyclical effect. This happened between 1929 and 1939. World War II is basically the main catalyst for us reaching out of the Depression here. It eliminated jobs. Families were broken apart because a lot of times what would happen is a father might become a migrant worker and he might go out west. You might have kids who go out west. Sometimes parents sold or gave their children up for adoption because they couldn't afford to feed them. You also had a high rate of suicide during this time. There were a lot of people who were incredibly unprepared for this event. There were some warning signs, but the layperson would not have known that. Just some pictures to show you what it would look like. So this is a bread line. What you're seeing here is it says free food. A child who is obviously uncomfortable and starving, probably very cold. If you look here, it probably looks like snow. I would assume that this is New York or Boston. You can see that the boots here have worn in the toes. Probably hungry. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 people. This looks like a parent. And they are attempting to feed themselves. It looks like some kind of poor man's soup. The stock market crash, we've talked about this a little bit now, but so my time is running up on this recording, which means I'm going to go ahead and stop, and I will post a part 2 to finish this presentation.